Right, this part of the filming is being done out of order. This is a new habit I'm trying to get into of just post-testing the motherboard, CPU and RAM before I fit it into a computer. Now, I very rarely get caught out with no posts. However, when I do, the first thing that crosses my mind is I wish I'd tested all of this before I put it in the case. So something that you might want to consider. It's not practical for everyone. However, for me, it's very easy to do. Is, as you can see, just set up the computer bare on the bench before you start the build with your core components in, and just check that it posts, basically. So that's what we're doing now. Okay, that's everything hooked up. So power supply is on. Let's short the power on switch. That looks promising. And do we have display output? We did for a moment, then it went to no signal. Is that power cycling? Because the boot sequence lights in the top right of the board are slowly cycling. Ah, there we go. It just did stuff. There we go, there's our post. BIOS has been reset. So if you've just powered up your new setup for the first time, keep in mind it's perfectly normal for a brand new motherboard or a motherboard that's otherwise been reset to take 10, 20, maybe even 30 seconds to actually post. Completely normal. Wait it out. Give it at least 60 seconds before you decide that it's not working. Because as I say, brand new motherboards, they always do this. And it always makes me panic. So yeah, that's ready to roll. So let's cut back to the build. Hello interwebs, welcome to Let's Build Computers. We're doing a budget gaming build today. So this one I'm going to go into more depth on the components I've chosen as I build this PC. It's not going to be the most rapid computer we've ever built or anything. However, it's going to be an honest starter's gamer computer, which is basically what the client is looking for. So for this, when I was picking out the components for it, I was looking for absolute cost cutting without breaking the computer, but also ensuring that there is plenty of overhead to expand the computer later on down the line when more money is available or when they hit the limits of the components we put in it. We've got a Cooler Master MasterBox Lite 5 here. That's the case we're using. Very, very cheap and affordable case. I paid £42 for this case. There'll be a separate review video on this guy going into more details about it, but really low cost, good looking case. We've got a GTX 1050 Ti going in there, and this is probably one of the best bang for buck graphics cards money can buy right now. They're about £140 or so, and they will play basically anything. You can run any AAA game on this. You may have to wind the graphics down slightly, but you can boot up any AAA game on that. So they are really honest budget graphics card. And of course, it's a 10 series, so it's modern technology. We're not using some old gen thing like a 9 series that's starting to show its age. And likewise, later on down the line, graphics card really easy to upgrade. Then on the platform, I've got a Ryzen 5 was it a 1700? Yeah, 1500. I've got a Ryzen 5 1500X, and I'll talk more about why I picked that CPU when we get into the build. And I've got an X370 Gigabyte motherboard here with 8 GB of RAM. So the X370 chipset, it's one generation out of date, as is this Ryzen 5. However, because it's the AM4 platform, this guy's going to be supported until 2020. Like in a couple of years, when there's more money available or when the customer wants more CPU horsepower, they can just drop the Ryzen 3rd or 4th gen into this guy, or they can stick in a Ryzen 7 and that will be absolutely fine. This board will power that. You just keep doing BIOS upgrades on it, basically. So before I ship this computer out, I will make sure that it's running the latest BIOS on it, just to make that easier down the line. And then we've got 8 gigabytes of RAM. Now on a gaming computer, you really want 16 these days, but that's another, well, it's another 70 or 80 pounds. That's a lot of money, but I've opted for a single stick of 8 gigabytes of RAM here, and it's a very common Kingston HyperX Fury module. So really easy. This time in a year, this time 6 months down the line, whenever there's more money available, just buy another one of those and just drop it into the other slot. Bang, you got 16 gigs. We don't have to sell this one. We don't have to change out the RAM. You can just buy the second module later on. Really easy to upgrade. So just before I kick off on this, I'll just talk about the budget for this computer. So the budget for this build was £600. That's how much money I had to spend on this thing. Gaming computer for 600 quid. This is just the tower we're talking about. Quite a tall order if you want something that's decent. You can build cheap computers for less than that, sure, but something that's decent that you could actually be proud of and show off to your friends and say, and they'll be like, oh wow, that's actually a really nice computer. That was the objective here. Now, the parts cost came in at just shy of that, which means obviously, because I've got to make a profit as well, I'm in business to make money. Now, if you were building this yourself, you could upgrade the CPU and motherboard to an X470 with a Ryzen 2nd gen CPU, and it would come out at about the same price. I dropped down by one generation in order to save some money in order to get a profit margin into this computer. So that's where my profit margin comes in. So that was CPU and the motherboard are one gen out of date, basically. Other than that, everything else, I'm going to just straight out say, you know, as cost price kind of thing. So let's start with this power supply. So this is a GameMax GP400A, and I used one of these briefly in another build, and I was very impressed with it. So firstly, this is a budget power supply. It cost me £28. Now, how do we know that it's a cheap-ass power supply? It's easy. We look at the power rails. Now, the one that we're interested in is the 12-volt rail, because that's what's powering the big stuff in here, like the CPU and the graphics card. Now, this one makes it very easy to calculate because they've actually done all the wattage calculations for you. But what you want to do is you take the voltage, so 12 volts, times the amps, and that gives you the watts. So 12 times 24 is 288. So this power supply can deliver 288 watts on its 12-volt rail. Now, on a premium power supply, I would expect to get the label wattage. So I would expect to get 400 watts just on the 12-volt rail alone. So this is how we know that it's a cheap power supply, because it cannot deliver its total power just on the 12-volt rail. That's how I know that it's a poor man's power supply. But despite this being a poor man's power supply, it is 80 plus bronze rated, and that's the efficiency rating. So that means that although it's a cheap power supply, it's not garbage. If I had a power supply that was not delivering its rated wattage on the 12-volt rail and it wasn't even bronze rated, that would be a trash power supply that I wouldn't trust as far as I could toss it. So in addition to that, as you can see, it's actually a really nicely presented power supply. It comes in a nice box. We've got this nice matte black cover with a nice looking fan on it, a nice looking brand logo, and nice looking cables. You know, the cables are slightly thinner gauge wire than you'd find on an expensive power supply, but they're fully braided, even comes with this nice little wrap on it. And the other big thing as well is that when you get down to the sort of the sub £40 power supplies and sort of the £30 and under, you'd be amazed how difficult it is to find a power supply that actually has the PCI Express power connector on it, the 6+2 connector for your graphics card. It's actually quite difficult to find a budget power supply that has one of these guys on it, because none of them are confident enough to actually power a graphics card. Whereas this one it's only got the single connector, so you're not going to power any big graphics cards, but you don't want to power a big graphics card from this anyway. So there's that. The other disadvantage of this power supply is the cables on it are reasonably short, which means we might have trouble routing those in a minute, but we'll get to that. So I'm not going to do a full review of this thing, it's just a quick look over. But the point is, I like this power supply a lot. Also, hello GameMax, if you're watching this, I do want to look at more of your stuff. I really liked your cases at EGX. Sponsor me, please. So let's get our power supply fitted. Now on the Cooler Master MasterBox Lite we've got here, it uses one of these natty power supply back plates. These are super annoying and I hate them. Yeah, you make the case slightly taller and you don't need one of these, but whatever, we can deal with it. So we've got to put this back plate on the back of the power supply, and then the whole thing is going to slot back into the computer again. Now, as regular watchers will know, I like to mount my power supplies with the fan pointing up. However, on the MasterBox Lite, it's not actually possible to do that. There is insufficient venting on the power supply shroud to get away with doing that. So we will be placing it fan side down, which means it's drawing in from underneath the computer and sucking up lots of dust. So yeah, we'll have to remind the customer to do maintenance on their computer. And because of the amount of adjustable movement we have on that, I'm just going to leave those screws loose until I put the power supply in the computer. And then when I've got the power supply nice and seated, I'll then tighten up all the screws so we know that it's seated exactly where it wants to be. Right, so now the power supply is fitted, we're just going to sort out what cables we're going to need and what we're not going to need. So obviously we're going to want the big ATX cable, so that is going to be coming across and up to probably there-ish. We're going to need a serial ATA cable because we do have a hard drive going into this as well. So that's probably going to go down the bottom there. Let me see, we've got a second power chain there. We don't need that, we only need one of them. What's that? That's CPU power. So this is where the short cable is going to come back to bite me in the ass. So let's see if this one's going to reach for me. It has to get all the way up the back of the case. Oh, you know what? I think it's going to reach. That's got to go all the way up to this top right corner here, through there and down. That's going to reach. Have they made that longer? I wonder if they've made that longer. I'd be interested to know. No problems. That's absolutely fine. Happy with that. I mean, if you had a bigger case, that might turn into an issue. It's only just reaching, but it does reach. And the last time I used this, it didn't. So yeah, good times. Right, and we are going to need our PCI Express wire as well, because we've got a graphics card going into this guy. And let me see. I might do the Meta cable. Yeah. We'll poke him over there for the time being, because I'm not sure exactly where he's going to be needed yet. Right, and then, so it's just that one piece, it's just that one power chain for drives that we don't need, and we'll slot him down the back there. Just tuck him down the bottom, no problem. USB 3. Oh, USB 3 is going to the bottom. And so are all of these, in fact. Cool, okay, I'm going to send these all down to the bottom of the case for now. Right, that's our basic cable routing done. Let's flip over and stick a motherboard in this thing. Alright, so our cases come with the standoffs not fitted, so we've got to drop those in. So I'm going to grab my motherboard and I'm going to line it up and just check which standoffs we need. So let's grab you. And for the record, you'll notice that the CPU and RAM is already fitted. That's because I've already bench tested the platform just to make sure everything works, which will be in the edit at some point. I don't know when. So we've got screws along the back as normal, and then we have 1, 2, 1. Right, okay, not a lot of screw holes on this motherboard, but I guess it doesn't need them because it's only a narrow one. Fair enough. So we need that one, that one, that one, and that one. And now we can use the convenient nut driver adapter they've got here. So it's a Phillips to hex adapter. I do have a specialized screwdriver for putting these in, but these hex adapters are actually really handy. I always lose them after building a computer though. That in properly, yep, that's fine. There we go. Right, now we need the I/O panel. Okay, so now we can plonk our motherboard in. So as I mentioned earlier on, we've got a Gigabyte, it's a GA AX370, so this is a budget X370 board. Now, I've actually done a separate video where I discuss the pros and cons of cheap motherboards, so there'll be more information on that in this. However, what we've done here is we've basically purchased the cheapest X370 motherboard I could find that didn't look like a pile of rubbish. Now, again, there is the X470 series out. However, by dropping to an X370 with a first gen Ryzen, we've got a 1500X here, I saved a little bit of money, which then became my profit margin on this job. Now, that came with no serious performance penalty at all. I did actually check, and there's not a lot of difference between the first and second gen in terms of, benchmark power. So obviously newer is better. However, in this instance, we're not going to notice the difference. Now, some of the keen-eyed viewers will also note, oh, Graham, you're using Ryzen. I thought you didn't like Ryzen. Well, I would have, my first choice was to put an i3 into this build. However, for some reason or other, the cost of the i3 seems to be soaring right now. I expected to pay about 100 quid for an i3 motherboard, like a Z370, and about £100 for an i3 8100. But for some reason or other, I couldn't find an 8100 anywhere, and the only people who said they had one were asking £170 for it, and that's silly money. I ain't paying 170 quid for an i3. You're straying into the realms of low i5s there. But I did find that you can pick up a Ryzen 5 1500X that was just as good, if not better, than the i3 for about £100. I think I paid 130 for this chip and I paid 70 for the motherboard. So again, £200 for the motherboard and CPU for something that is just as good, if not slightly better, than the i3 would have been. So good score all around. That really helped out because for a moment I thought we were bust on the budget for this. So we haven't had to drop to, we haven't put a Ryzen 3 in there, we haven't used a cheap Ryzen, and we haven't used a Pentium or something like that. We've got a proper performance class processor in this. Optionally, the 2200G is the second gen Ryzen. It's just as fast as this, but it has integrated graphics as well. If this was an office build, that would have been my weapon of choice. However, we've got a 1050 Ti going into this computer, so I don't care about having onboard graphics. Not an issue. Right, I'm just going to check in advance whether I have imperial or metric standoffs, and they are imperial. So make sure you do your test, because trap for young players I often see on amateur builds, they've got the wrong screws in the motherboard, and that means the screws don't go in properly and all the screws are wonky and the motherboard feels like trash. Oh, well, that sucks. I have no standoff for that screw point. I thought that looked like a weird screw hole on this motherboard. It doesn't line up with anything. So that's partly the fault of the motherboard and partly the fault of the case, because those two are really close together. I thought that looked like a weird place to put a screw hole because it doesn't reach out to there. But likewise also, this case obviously doesn't have all of the holes in it, which is often surprising because usually the case has got many holes in it just in case. So that's unfortunate. It's not the end of the world. However, it does mean that I'm going to have to be careful when I'm plugging in the ATX power connector, because obviously there will be no support on the motherboard past this point. So past this point, we're just bending the motherboard down. So we've got to be a little bit careful there. Okay, let's get our ATX cable in. So we're just going to put a nice little flex on that wire, line that up over the connector, and I'm now going to get my fingers underneath the motherboard so I can press down on there without bending the motherboard. And we're just going to check, and yep, that locking tab is flat. It's not slightly open, so I know that the connector is in properly, and I can't get my fingernail between the plug and the connector block, so I know that that's all the way in. Right, that's our graphics card. We don't need him yet. So let's sort out our front panel connectors. All right, hard drive LED. Positive pin goes toward the back of the computer. Reset switch goes next to it. Switch isn't polarized, so it doesn't matter which way around it goes. Power switch above the reset isn't polarized, doesn't matter which way around it goes. And then the power LED, and again, positive pin goes toward the back of the computer. There we go, those are all flat in the connector. And then in a minute, we'll pull all of these wires back and out the way. And there's our USB 3 connector. That seems to be the thing for AMD boards, to have the USB 3 connector down the bottom, and I'm not a fan of that because the USB 3 front panel header is a big, heavy cable. Too big and heavy in my opinion, but there it is. And it's really awkward to have it down there and make it look tidy. And then we also need to plug in our CPU power cable. So that's just going to flip over and plug straight in there. No problem. And we'll plug in our top fan as well. Okay, so we've got a 3-pin fan plugged into a 4-pin header. That's completely fine. The 4-pin header will auto sense that there is a 3-pin fan connected, and it will switch to voltage control rather than PWM control. So that means this fan won't be quite as quiet as a 4-pin fan would be. However, it'll work just fine. And while we're here, we may as well put on our AMD Wraith cooler. So this is not the... it's got weird screws on it. Interesting, it doesn't use the hold down. I was expecting it to use the hold down. So we've actually got to remove these brackets. Okay, fine. Wasn't expecting that. Right, now of course the problem is, as soon as I've removed the hold down bracket, the back plate has immediately dropped through the motherboard, so I need to now put one hand underneath the computer to hold that in place while I refit our Wraith cooler. So we're going to just sit him on top. Now which way round do I want it to go? We can put it that way round. If we put it that way round, the AMD logo is in line with all the rest of the logos, so they're all the same way up. So let's do that. And I literally just need to get the screws into place so I can let go of the bottom of the computer. I don't want to move it around like that. That's the other corner. Okay, I can let go now. Cool. That's a vicious hold down on it. There we go. Right, that's all 4 screws picked up. So now we're just going to screw all of those down evenly. Cool. That's quite vicious for a stock cooler. The new style AMD Wraith coolers, these are apparently very good. They've got a nice big copper core in them, which is good, and it's got a nice big low noise fan on the top, which is also good. The fan was the weak point of the old AMD stock coolers. However, no heat sinks, no heat pipes in it, which disappoints me slightly. So yeah, they're still not quite as good as aftermarket cooling in my opinion, but for a stock cooler, it looks a lot better than the Intel one does, which is why I've opted to use it in this instance. And again, on a budget build, the cost of a third-party cooler, it's quite a knock out your budget when it comes down to it. Right, and I've just twisted the cable that direction, so the cable wants to press back again into the back of the computer. So now it's just naturally sitting back in the top of the computer there, and it won't fall out, and I don't have to tie it down with anything, so it's nice and tidy. Okay, let's pull these guys back out of the way. Oh, that USB 3 header is dreadful. I'm just going to unplug that and see if I can do anything about it. The last time I saw one of these, this header was broken on the board, and I had difficulty sorting all that out, and I can quite easily see how the client managed to break that off. I'm not a fan. I'm glad that the USB 3C connector is actually completely different, because this was not one of the best designs ever. There we go, let's go for that. That's good enough. I don't actually need to tie any of this down. That's fine as it is. I don't need to do anything there. If you don't have to tie your cables down because they're just sitting nicely like that, then don't. You know, don't tie things all back with zip ties just for the sake of it. You'll just give yourself a harder job if you ever have to move any of it. Okay, in comes our M2 SSD. This motherboard has one of these fancy M2 shields. It's a sort of a cooler plate. Very basic cooling. I'm not sure how effective these things actually are yet. I hear that M2 SSDs, particularly NVMe ones, can get pretty toasty. However, I've not done any specific tests yet to see how much of an issue that really is. Now the question is, yeah, I've never actually used one of these, so I guess we'll peel that off. And that's just going to lean against our SSD and just hold it down in the slot, and we screw down on the endpoint. It would be nice if they'd given me an extra screw down point there, but I guess that's fine, that's doing the job. It's not going to fall out, and that is now leaning up against that heatsink to keep it nice and cool. Alright. And finally, in goes our GTX 1050 Ti. Just get him lined up, settle him into the slot. There we go. Hold down, screw in. And our power lead is not going to reach. Okay, we need to bring the power lead back round to this hole. Alternatively, theoretically, the meta for your graphics card is to bring your power lead up from one of the holes in this area. However, this case doesn't have one like here. And in addition to that, I personally think that that only really works if you're using individually braided cables. Otherwise, I prefer to do this method where it comes around from the side. That's that. And the +2 wire, I'm just going to thread that into the side. It's not plugging into anything, it's just hanging there. And I'm just going to put a little cable tie around that just to hold it in place so we don't have this annoying +2 wire hanging in the breeze. There we go. Nice and tidy. Alright, let's turn her on. Here we go. Power at the back, power at the front. There's a red light in there. There's the motherboard accent LEDs. And there's post. So that's the only light we're going to get in from this thing. The budget could not afford any wash lighting for the case. However, for an extra, I don't know, £10 or something, you could buy yourself an LED strip to put inside this case. Or if you bought a slightly more expensive case, like for example the P400 comes with LEDs as standard, so that's very handy as well. And you could easily have a lit up case. However, 600 quid, that's not bad going, I think. Thank you very much for watching, everyone. I'll see you all next time. Goodbye for now.